right, thank you for staying with the Monday Report. Let's start the conversation now on the road to COP28. It's officially starting on 30th all the way to 12th of December, but on the 24th, there are pre-sessions that will begin. That's in the next 4 days from now. It's happening in Dubai. But we want to talk about this at a time when Africa Climate Summit just concluded as well. We had the Nairobi Declaration, and in COP27, there were declarations of about $230 million that was supposed to come for climate financing. Has it been disbursed? Who has it gone to? Has it reached the most vulnerable people? Those are the conversations we're having with my guests in studio. Let me start by introducing them. From my farthest right there, Jesse Forrester, CEO, Mobility. Thank you so much for making time. Followed by John Kabuye, Vice Chair, Land and Physical Planning Sector Board at KEPSA. Thank you very much for making time. And Joseph Murabula, CEO, Kenya Climate Innovation Center, KCIC. Thank you very much for making time. And Murabula, I'll start from there. So up to $230 million was pledged then. Yeah. It's still not very clear whether that money was disbursed or not. But how then do we ensure that this kind of financing reaches the most vulnerable, who are the most affected by climate change?
Yeah, thank you, Trevor. And that's an important question. Generally, what we've seen over the years, right from 2009, when at the Copenhagen COP, yeah, there was a pledge of developing countries putting on the table $100 billion per annum to support the fight against climate change. And most of that has not happened. Yeah. The basic reason is that these pledges are not basically, they are pledges, as they say. It's not money on the bank. So what happens is that then once this pledged, there's got to be a mechanism to which it is being raised, and then there's got to be a structure through which that money is disbursed. And so the same thing to the $230 million that was pledged at the COP27 last year for the Adaptation Fund. There is still institutional mechanisms to sort out. Yeah. Who exactly manages this fund, which sort of projects should it go to, which countries should be beneficiaries, and that sort of thing. And therefore, to my knowledge, up to now, there's been no disbursement of that money. Yeah. And so even the question about whether it has reached the ground to the most vulnerable doesn't rise, because the money has not been disbursed, yeah, as we speak, at least to the best of my knowledge. Mm. So the second question you asked is, how do we ensure that this money reaches the most vulnerable? Usually, the finance follows three things. Finance follows policy, finance follows technology, and finance follows action, as it is. So you must deliberately decide that in terms of where we are going. So if you talk about Kenya, for instance, you must then now deliberately decide that as a country, we are focused on a number of things around climate change, green transition, adaptation mechanisms, supporting the vulnerable communities. Once that policy is in place, yeah, and then you now work on what you'd call inclusivity. This is now bringing in everybody who should be able to benefit from this money, including the most vulnerable. And you do this by policy, so that once that is in place, you go to the funders and say, this is my policy as a country, this is my priorities, which is where I want to put the money. Now help me put the money here, this is where it will go. Yeah. Because at the end of the day, even those who provide money are interested in accountability. Mm. And accountability only starts if there's clarity around how the funds will flow, who is going to be the beneficiary, and who will account for it.
Yeah, and Kabuye, as you also delve into why the missing link into from the private sector perspective, one of the biggest conversations in COP28 this time is going to be transitioning to clean energy. What will it take for the private sector to actually transition to clean energy?
Okay, thank you, Trevor. Maybe if I take a few steps backwards with COP, over the years, the private sector really hasn't played a significant role when it comes to the COP discussions. But I think beginning over COP28, we're going to see a significant inclusion of the private sector because ultimately the private sector is the implementer of basically most of the actions which will take place. So, and also the private sector will also be involved in providing investment capital into these, some of these climate actions. So now, as a private sector, we really are organizing ourselves to see that we play a major role when it comes to climate action. And now when you talk about just transitions, to be specific, well, the private sector is also very much affected because what exactly is just transition in the first place? So basically, just transition is the acknowledgement that where we are at the moment is that we are a bit inefficient, we are highly carbonated, but then we cannot just wake up one day, one morning and say we are doing away with all those assets which we are currently using. So we need to phase them slowly in a more just transitional way. And basically, who are those who are supposed to be doing that? Now, that's basically the private sector which is supposed to do that. So now that's where the whole conversation around just transition comes in, so that the private sector can see how now they start to do away with most of these assets which they're currently using to create wealth or maybe generate more capital, and then ultimately have that particular roadmap which will help them that at this particular point in time, say maybe a horizon year, let's just say maybe 2035, that's the private sector's horizon year, and you say that by this particular time, I will have finished doing away with these assets which are currently using, so as to avoid most of the private sector getting entangled with stranded assets.
So that means then you need to get almost like some cutoffs, because then the government would have to put in lines and say by 2027, for example, then the entire private sector should have shifted to clean energy. But what does that look like? What is the clean energy? What are you going to get tax breaks? What happens?
Well, at the moment, it hasn't been very clear. So basically, it's up to the private sector to say that this is going to be our decarbonization roadmap. So at the moment, you will hear big corporations talking about decarbonization plans 2035, 2040, even 2050, especially for these big corporations, because they are heavily invested in these assets which are really releasing a lot of our carbon emissions into the atmosphere. So at the moment, the most important thing is to provide a roadmap and then provide a mechanism how you are going to actually achieve that, and you report against what you've actually been able to say that you're doing, and that way you're always able to keep an eye on exactly what you are doing towards decarbonizing your business or your assets.
Jesse, your company is embarking on an interesting journey, rather ambitious one, if I may say, that you have a rider riding all the way to Dubai.
That's correct.
Why is that important, and what message is it meant to send? Just tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, so as we're talking about clean energy and a transition, when you look at e-mobility in Kenya, it's become quite the hot topic. Maz is one of the companies that's leading the forefront and trying to battle a bunch of myths around electric motorcycles and electric vehicles in general. You know, when we talk about ICE or internal combustion engines, that industry has been around for the last 60, 70 years. And e-mobility is a new industry. So we want to raise awareness about the effects of climate change and really lead the transition together with our partners, ZAD Sustainability Prize and KCIC, Kenya Climate Innovation Center, about what e-mobility looks like on the road. Because we've gone to Egypt, the team is currently in Jordan, we're going to go through Saudi Arabia and planning on arriving at COP28 on December 6th, which is actually Transport Day and e-mobility day. At COP27 last year, there was a lot of conversation around solution providers. And being there, I found it quite shocking that not a lot of people understood that e-mobility was happening on the continent, specifically being led by Kenya. And so this is kind of a way to shake the table at COP. You know, we always say the conversation is quite at a high level, but truly when you marry climate finance with personal objectives for community members, then we see some magic start to happen, specifically in developing markets. And so this ride is just about bringing awareness to what we're doing to e-mobility, and that this is going to be a COP, hopefully, of action. And that's what they've promised for COP28.
Closer home here, Jesse, in fact, I heard a story today where people were complaining in Mombasa that the bikes are much weaker than their petrol counterparts. Is that true? Is that a myth? Is it something they're creating?
Not all electric motorcycles are made equal. So different motorcycles will have different promises to the market. Just the way you might have a Mercedes-Benz and you might have a Toyota. They have different aspects to them. And I think most locally founded companies like mine, I am a Kenyan, despite the name, have been going through R&D processes with our riders. Paying attention to the customer service and after-sales support, listening to customers and ensuring that we can deliver services as promised. Yeah. Because one thing that you'll see, especially as the cost of fuel continues to rise, is that it's really affecting the bottom line for most of our customers who are border riders. And when you have 60% to 70% operational cost to your business, and that's your daily take home, then any increase in terms of your pricing will definitely impact. And so this is where we see a real play out between climate and finance for the customer. Yeah. E-mobility has a promise to save customers, at least in Mazi's case, 27% every single day in their pockets. And potentially with scale, we can get that to 33%. That's a third. And if that is taken away, then you take away incentives for moving people towards transition. So when you look at businesses that have a triple bottom line effect, which is climate, finance, then social aspect of it, then you see that aspect start to happen. So not all electric motorcycles are made the same. There's been R&D for different companies. Some are new in the market and are testing out waters. I would like to caution everybody not to paint the industry with one brush.
Okay, but also what is their role in decarbonization?
Transport is the second largest polluter in Africa. Yeah. Actually, I think 1 million people die due to air pollution-related diseases, and a third of that is ambient pollution from transport. Motorcycles specifically are 10 times more pollutive per mile than an SUV, and the estimate count in East Africa is about 5 million. So from a tonnage perspective, if we can decarbonize motorcycles as a first, then things begin to change. We also know that motorcycles are the fastest growing vehicle segment. When Ford in America said the average American's dream is a car, I think for a lot of Kenyans, the average car they have, fast vehicle, is a motorcycle. And ensuring that those motorcycles are electric is something that's going to pay dividends, not only just to border riders, but to the country that imports a lot of foreign reserves on fuel that will begin to reduce. And we'll also see more dependency on KPLC, boosting revenues for the country. So you see a lot of these benefits from e-mobility being posed.
Okay. Let me bring back Murabula on this. Murabula, and Jesse mentioned KCIC. Yeah. What role have you played in the climate space, and what did you like to be prioritized heading into COP28?
Yeah, thanks for that question. Yeah, before I come to that question, I think I just want to echo what Jesse said about why it is important for them to demonstrate that the e-bike works, and therefore the ride from Nairobi to Dubai is something to applaud. Because quite a lot of times, people want to, first of all, see demonstrated impact. People want to see that this works before they go ahead and adopt. And then you find that as Jesse said, transport is the second biggest polluter after energy. And therefore, if we are able to get in clean energy and decarbonize transport, we are probably halfway through what we need. So what you asked me then is, what role has KCIC played? Now, KCIC is an 11-year institution. We've been here since 2012. And in terms of climate change strategy in this country, we've been at the forefront of just about everything around climate change, be it the Climate Change Act of 2016, which was then amended to the Climate Change Amendment Act of 2023, the Sustainable Waste Management Act of 2022, the Water Act of 2016. All this have had some input of KCIC one way or the other. So on the policy front, I think I would say we've stepped forward to support government efforts to be able to put in place policies to address climate change. Now, quite a lot of times, the most sustainable way of addressing climate change is what you'd call entrepreneurship. And so KCIC works at the center of innovation and entrepreneurship as a way of fighting climate change. And why that is important is because the enterprises tend to have an almost infinite life. They survive people, they survive their founders, and they're usually the best way to create resilience in the sense that they create jobs and they create economic opportunities. So KCIC over the last 11 years have supported about 3,000 enterprises. Organizations that were pure ideas. They walked into KCIC with an idea. KCIC staff sat with them, brainstormed on the basis of the support we provide across 5 thematic areas, which is financing, policy or enabling environment, facilities, market opportunities, information access. Through all these 5 areas, we're able to turn those ideas into businesses, and through what we call an acceleration process, we were able to turn them into commercial viable enterprises. So
over 3,000, you say?
Yes, over 3,000. Okay. We've had a success rate of close to 70%, so there are over 2,000 enterprises operating within Kenya that just started off as ideas. And all these are climate smart enterprises. And in terms of resilience, we generate an average of 4,000 jobs through these enterprises annually. So over the last 11 years, we've generated about 40,000 jobs, and that response resilience. But also in terms of just people who've had access to water, you're talking close to 83,000 people who otherwise would never have had access to safe water, getting access to safe water because of what KCIC has done. And that's before I talk about the impact in terms of renewable energy, solar systems, hydros, mini hydros, and a lot of organizations doing initiatives around waste management. So across the 5 sectors that we support, we've supported enterprise, we've created jobs, we've demonstrated resilience as our contribution towards the fight against climate change.
Okay. Kabuya, as we're looking into COP28, does the private sector have a unified position that this is what we are going with to COP28, and what is that?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why we have KEPSA. So KEPSA is basically the unifying voice for the private sector. Now, KEPSA was founded way back in 2002 as the umbrella body which brings all the private sector members together. So it's a composition of BMOs and also private companies who all come together to be able to advocate for issues which affect the private sector. And also, by extension, the private sector has also been able to be involved in the formulation of policy. And of course, it's a key stakeholder, especially in all the policies which are being formulated by government, because there is a very important input that we normally provide. So KEPSA has numerous sector boards. For example, I am currently seated here as the vice chair of the Land and Physical Planning Sector Board, but we also have the Environment Sector Board, which also basically looks into issues to do with climate change. And basically now that's the sector board that mirrors the Ministry of Environment to be able to see that all actions around climate change, the private sector is able to sort of like bring them under one vessel and be able to champion that one position, because what the private sector, as KEPSA is trying to do, is it's also trying to promote equity. And of course, one of the big things is to make sure that there is no environmental, for example, injustice, especially to the most vulnerable groups. And that's why you will find all sorts of organizations or BMOs in KEPSA, and they have a voice within that particular organization so that they can be able to advance the private sector's position as far as climate change is concerned. Now, for this particular sector, when it comes to COP28, the private sector also had its own declaration, And most of course, the declarations speak to most of the activities that the private sector is involved in. For example, green and circular economy. Basically, how do we transition from the current fossil-based or carbon-releasing and manufacturing to maybe a more cleaner? It looks into clean cooking. We are looking into green buildings. We're looking into sustainable infrastructure. We're looking into climate-smart agriculture. And of course, agroforestry. We're looking into coming up with standards for the products that are supposed to be consumed and all that. So the private sector really is championing all these issues, and they came up with one particular voice, and it affects virtually all those sectors. Well, they are very exhaustive, but I just wanted to mention a few.
Okay. Yeah. And Jesse, as a young entrepreneur yourself in the e-mobility space, and you mentioned the challenge of being painted with one brush, what do you see then as the opportunities now and the challenges going forward?
Yeah, so I think, you know, as mentioned from CAPSA, there are lots of opportunities in different sectors. I think climate is going to be the dominant industry that completely culminates in everybody's lives. So if you're talking about adaptation, whether it's agriculture, rethinking smart ways that we can do farming. I just saw a segment about the people who are farming octopus down at the coast. And I think that's quite an interesting approach that you wouldn't see traditionally. So I think that's one aspect in terms of availability of information to be able to jump in. But one thing that KCIC, I think, has done particularly well is to de-risk early stage businesses with grant capital. One of the key pillars of COP28 is green finance. We've talked about the high level, the billions and billions of dollars, but I believe if you were to give grant funding to thousands of Kenyans, say $10,000 and below, that's a lot of capital for a lot of people to start businesses and then pair them up with really good mentorship and allow them to really do what they need to do. And I think climate-based entrepreneurship is really what's going to have staying power, as you said. So I would encourage all entrepreneurs to apply at KCIC, but also for more of these donor-funded initiatives, USAID, etc., to really think through about how they can channel finance in a way that de-risks early-stage businesses. Because what you see across the board abroad is that entrepreneurs have access to very cheap capital. So the risk-taking appetite is a lot higher, and then we see more innovation. And we say Kenya is an innovation hub. We need to see more of that actually happen and then be dispersed. It's not, I think, super complicated. We've got people who are doing really good work already, and we can channel that finance through those institutions. And I think COP is one of the places where we need to make these voices heard, because one of the things they always say is, we don't know who we are going to fund, we don't know where the capital is going to go, but there are intermediaries, there are allocators of capital that can provide funding. And then you can get towards the venture capitalists and the debt providers. And your 3 years that the bank wants. Very few businesses last more than 3 years. So getting through that missing middle is very important. And I think something that is not highly addressed when it comes down to climate business.
Okay. I'll take a quick break here on Monday Report. When we come back, we'll talk about COP28 comprehensively now. What do they expect going into it? And then we'd also like to hear from you, Trevor Mbija at Citizen TV Kenya. Use the hashtag Monday Report. See you in just a bit.